What's up, guys? D-Rock1992 here. For this next video, I am going to highlight all of the big movies from the month of April that came out during that time period. It is a little bit late, not as late as last video when I did the March videos. I did the March videos about half of the month in, but now I've got some free time on my hands, and I am ready to go ahead and talk about the the big April movies. So let's get right to it. The first weekend of April, I'm not going to talk about. April 1st, I'm not going to talk about the movies, but there was a movie called God's Not Dead 2 and Meet the Blacks. Movies that, for me, are not worth talking about. Not really, because they're not big movies. Not really, anyway. Or notable films, at least. So I'm going to move on to the next weekend. And that would be April 8th. And there are actually 3 films that opened in that month, or in that weekend that I'm going to be talking about. And the first one is the newest Melissa McCarthy comedy, The Boss. So, The Boss is about this rich woman who gets convicted of insider trading, which is a big no-no among white collar crime. That's a white collar crime right there, insider trading. White collar meaning a rich person crime. And so Melissa McCarthy's character gets convicted of insider trading, sentenced to prison for a number of years. Then she comes back out and she tries to reestablish her empire. And if that sounds familiar, this is kind of a parody. In my opinion, this is kind of a parody of what happened to Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart did the same thing. I mean, she basically was convicted of the same thing, insider trading. She was big before she got convicted of it, got arrested, went to prison for a while, took a big hit in her popularity, but when she got out of prison, she was ready to reestablish her empire, and now she's as big as before. So, The Boss, to me, is kind of a parody of that, sort of. But yeah, I haven't seen The Boss yet. There's one thing, I probably won't see it in theaters, but if I see it I'm anxious to see it, because there are 2 things there's one thing that I'm worried about, and one thing that I'm excited about. I'll start with the one thing I'm excited about for this movie, is that this movie's following Spy from last year. Another comedy of Melissa McCarthy's that came out last year that was a big hit, and I really enjoyed Spy a lot. But the one thing that has me concerned is the director. Her husband, Ben Falcone, is directing this movie. And he directed Tammy with Melissa McCarthy from a couple years ago. And that movie was not good at all. I did not like Tammy at all as a comedy. So that kind of has me concerned. But on the other hand, Spy was such a good movie as well. Another little thing, I mean, it doesn't get me that concerned, but the rating of it, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 19% rating. So that doesn't get me as concerned. The most concerned I am is, Ben Falcone's directing this, and he directed Tammy. But with The Boss, so far it's done well, box office-wise. $29 million and a budget. $29 million budget and a $66.9 million box office total so far. So the movie's been profitable, And I think that a big reason for that is because of Spy. Because Spy was such a big hit with audiences, and people are wanting to go see Melissa McCarthy again. Seeing what she can do in her next comedy. So, say what you will about Melissa McCarthy. I think there are some people out there that are tired of her shtick, but her movies make money. There's no doubt. Even Tammy made money. So it's like she's going to continue to do what makes her successful and all that. And so hopefully when I see it, it's good. Hopefully. I'm kind of looking forward to this movie, seeing it on Putlocker probably. The next movie that came out the 8th was a movie called Demolition. And I think wide release. It was theatrically released April 8th, 2016. So, Demolition stars Jake Gyllenhaal, Naomi Watts, Chris Cooper. And it's about a guy who has a very he has to he's a guy that has to Jake Gyllenhaal's character is a guy who has to get over a tragic loss, and he has to rebuild his life, basically. That's essentially what the plot is. The box office total, it's made $2.7 million. I don't think this movie was meant to be a big budget film. Definitely not. But and critically, it's pretty mixed. 52%. A little over half of all critics liked it. So a little bit of a mixed review, and not a lot of money, but I don't think it was meant to be this type of film. But I just wanted to talk about it because Jake Gyllenhaal's a pretty big star. And I had seen some of the trailers and all that, and actually I liked one of the trailers I did see, so I actually probably will see it once it comes out on Putlocker at some point, And then the next movie that came out the weekend of April 8th was Hardcore Henry. Hardcore Henry is a very fascinating film for me because it plays like a first-person shooter video game. So it's shot almost entirely from a first-person's perspective, like you see in video games. It just reminds you of if you see this movie, I'm betting it's going to remind you of the first-person aspect in a lot of your shooter games. A lot of your shooter games like Call of Duty and the James Bond games and all that sort of thing on your various game systems. So Hardcore Henry, I think it's about a guy who has to take revenge against somebody who kidnaps his wife or something like that. Something like that anyway. But yeah, this movie is very much a test. It's very much an experiment, because if this movie hits big, then you're going to probably see a lot of those first-person shooter you're probably going to see a lot of the first-person shooter movies start to hit big, like the video games and all that sort of thing have always hit, basically. But Hardcore Henry, thus far, on a $2 million budget, it's made $11.3 million. So I don't think this movie was meant to be a huge, huge blockbuster film, because I don't think it's hit a lot of theaters. I don't believe, anyway. But, there's a couple actors in it that are somewhat... Tim Roth, he's a guy who's been in some movies, and Sharlto Copley, he's been in some films as well. Critically, this movie has a 49%, so little, so 1 percentage under half of all reviewers like this movie. So, it's one of those movies that it's exciting to watch. It's a cool perspective, for the moviegoer, but maybe the story doesn't match up with it, the story and all that. Because a movie does have to have some sort of story in order to be successful, more successful and all that. You can have a good movie with great action and all that, but you need a story to help guide the action along, So it just seems from what the critics are saying that Hardcore Henry didn't have that story in all aspects. Regardless of that, though, I'm definitely still going to see this movie once it comes out on Putlocker, probably. I will definitely be out there and seeing it because it looks exciting. It definitely looks pretty exciting. So, now moving on to the weekend of April 15th. And for that, there's a couple movies here that I'm going to be talking about. And the first one is the fourth film in a relatively big franchise, and that would be Barbershop: The Next Cut. This movie, I have not seen any of the Barbershop movies, and I want to. They're on my list, my very lengthy list of movies that I want to see. The Barbershop movies that came before. So, in order to see this movie, I definitely have to see all the other films as well. But yeah, Barbershop, it's kind of the story about this guy who owns a barbershop, and he has to go through a lot of various challenges and stuff like that, I think is what this franchise has been all about. So Barbershop: The Next Cut is one of those movies that is the next movie in this series. So far, on a $20 million budget, it's made $44.7 million. It has Ice Cube, Cedric the Entertainer. These two guys, I believe, have been in every other movie, if I'm not mistaken. Nicki Minaj is in this movie. And Nicki Minaj was in this movie called The Other Woman that came out a couple of years ago. And I actually didn't think her performance was that bad in that movie, in The Other Woman. It wasn't Academy Award winning by any stretch, but it was a solid performance. So, kind of curious to see this movie because of her, actually. I'm a fan of her music and all that. She's a good musician and good hip-hop/rap artist. So I'm curious to see it, but I'm going to see all the other Barbershop movies first. Now, critically for Barbershop, this is the one that's the big surprise. It has a 92% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Never would I have guessed that this movie would have a 92% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Because it's a comedy with some dramatic elements in it as well. But first and foremost, a comedy. You just don't see a lot of comedies get a lot of good critical reaction from critics, You just don't see a lot of it. So this movie must have really touched critics enough where this movie got a high rating and all that. So good for that movie. And I'll definitely see it once it comes out, probably. Next movie I'm going to talk about is a movie called Criminal. And this movie has an all-star cast. You have Kevin Costner. You have Gary Oldman. You have Tommy Lee Jones. Just an all-star cast in this movie. It really is incredible. Um, and the thing is, these three actors that I mentioned, this is their second collaboration together. You got to go all the way back to 1991, and they were in the JFK movie that came out that year about Kennedy's John F. Kennedy's assassination. I think that was a movie about that. But Criminal, anyway, is about this convict who's implanted with a dead CIA agent's memories to finish a big assignment. Basically, the dead CIA agent's played by Ryan Reynolds, actually. But yeah, Criminal. That's the basic story of the film, and so this movie overall, on a $31.5 million budget, it's made only $17 million so far. I mean, maybe that might change a little bit. It came out April 15th, so I don't know if it's still in theaters or not, but you have to consider that movie kind of a failure because I think they wanted it. This type of movie just looks like to me it would be a big budget film, big budget action film, and to have it fail, to have it not, go over the budget at all, isn't that good. Critically, the movie has a 32% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which also doesn't help the film as well. Negative reviews, a low box office showing. Criminal, you have to kind of consider it right now a dud. One of the big duds of April for sure. Then there's another movie that I'm curious about. I'm pretty curious about this movie. I don't know if it'll be a movie I see, but after seeing the trailer, it was pretty good. Green Room is the name of this movie. It's a horror movie, which actually, I'm not the biggest fan of horror movies, but I did see this trailer, and I liked it. It was intriguing enough. And one of the big actors in this movie is Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart's been a long-time actor. He was in Star Trek, one of those series of Star Trek. He's, of course, Professor X in the X-Men series. He's been well known for a lot of different things. So Green Room is about this. So what it says here is the plot follows a punk band who find themselves at the mercy of a group of neo-Nazi skinheads after witnessing a murder at a remote club in the Pacific Northwest. So it sounds very interesting, very, very weird, very strange. The movie so far, it's not meant to be a big movie at all. I don't think this movie was not meant to be a big movie at all. Budget of $5 million. It's made $1.3 million. And critically, it has an 89% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So it is one of those movies that's not meant to make big money, but it's getting good critical reaction for it. So there you go. So I'm kind of intrigued. I don't know if I will see it coming when it comes out, but maybe. It'll be one of my maybes, probably. Next film. Actually, there's another film that came out April, the week of April 15th, and let's see here, and that would be The Jungle Book. The Jungle Book, one of the big movies of this year and all that. I think The Jungle Book is a live-action adaptation of the animated Jungle Book movie that came out in the 60s, I want to say it came out in. And this was a Disney animated movie, of course. So The Jungle Book, directed by Jon Favreau, who directed the first two Iron Man movies, and he's been a successful director and actor, basically. So this is a retelling of the classic story of The Jungle Book. Of course, you have the young kid Mowgli, who is trying to find his way and survive in the jungle while trying to find his way, basically. So The Jungle Book, so far, this movie's been it's been a box office smash. $175 million budget, $688.2 million. And this is very much from what I've heard about this movie, this is a very computer generated, a new type of movie experience. A lot of the movie, from what I've heard, has been shot exclusively in CGI in a green room setting in Los Angeles. From what I've heard, a lot of the movie is fake, but it looks so real. And a lot of the movie was shot, like I said, in a green room setting in Los Angeles, I think it was, from what I've heard. The only thing that is not fake is the boy, the kid who plays Mowgli in the movie. So, yeah, this is a technical achievement. I think it's being hailed as a technical achievement. Because of its success, you may see a lot of movies that are like The Jungle Book come out, for sure. I'm actually quite curious. I wasn't really into seeing it in theaters. This is one of those movies I'll probably see, I will probably see when it comes out on Putlocker or on DVD and all that. So, I'll be interested. The voice cast for this movie is so impressive. Bill Murray plays Baloo the Big Bear. Ben Kingsley plays Bagheera the Panther. Idris Elba plays Shere Khan the Tiger. Scarlett Johansson plays Kaa the Snake. Christopher Walken plays King Louie I think he's an orangutan, if I'm not mistaken. So, you have a very, very impressive big voice cast, for this movie and all that. So, I mentioned the money it made, which so far the movie's been a big success box office-wise, and it'll continue to be. Critically, this movie has a 94% rating. So the critics are also praising this movie as well. And so it's, again, from what I've heard, this movie has really gone through, there's a big advancement in CGI, basically, in the computer-generated imagery, I think is what it stands for. But CGI has been enhanced because of this movie, from what I've heard. So, I'm actually kind of curious to see it, for sure. The next movie on my list. Actually, we're going to move into the next week. And there's two movies in particular that opened the week of April 22nd that I'm going to talk about. And the first one is Elvis and Nixon. It's a comedy and drama, and it's based on a historical event. Kind of a weird historical event that actually happened. Now, this is a meeting. This story is about a meeting between singer Elvis Presley and President Richard Nixon in 1970. And they meet up. Elvis wants Nixon to swear him in as an undercover agent in the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. This is a weird story, considering that Elvis Presley was one of the many musicians, unfortunately, that got caught up in drugs and all that sort of thing. You know, caught up in drugs and all that while he was in his singing career. So, and he ended up dying of it might have been a drug overdose, I think, in the 75, I want to say. But this is a weird story and all that, and it actually did happen. Now, the two players, Kevin Spacey plays President Richard Nixon, and Michael Shannon plays Elvis Presley. And I believe that Michael Shannon has played Elvis Presley in the past. He might have had a cameo as Elvis in Forrest Gump, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not too mistaken here. No, actually he did not. I thought he did. Anyway, it might have been Kurt Russell, actually. Kurt Russell, I think, did those cameos and all that. So, Elvis and Nixon. Again, this movie I don't think is meant to be a big movie. So, box office, it's made $929,377. So, but it'll still make a little bit of money anyway. But yeah, this movie is not meant to be a big film. Critically, it has a 77%, which is a good rating for sure. So yeah, Elvis and Nixon is that first movie that I'm going to talk about. Then the next movie that I'm going to talk about here is The Huntsman Winter's War. And this movie is a prequel and a sequel to the movie Snow White and the Huntsman. Snow White and the Huntsman came out in 2012. And this is a live-action telling of the classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs tale. You know, the classic Snow White fairy tale. These two movies. Well, Snow White and the Huntsman was. The Huntsman Winter's War is about two sisters that battle it out. The evil sister, played by Charlize Theron, and Emily Blunt plays the good sister. The good sister has to recruit these huntsmen to go to war against her evil sister. So that's basically what it's about. Big cast, too. Big, Chris Hemsworth, Thor himself, is the star of this film. Charlize Theron, as I mentioned. Emily Blunt, also, as I mentioned, is in this film. So, a big cast. So far, the budget's been $115 million, and so far it's made $132 million. I think it'll continue to make money, and I believe that this movie, I think, will continue to make money. And, excuse me, it will also, it won't make a ton of money off its budget, but it'll break even probably, from what it looks like. But critically, critics pan this film 17% on Rotten Tomatoes, and from what I've heard, a lot of people have said this is an unnecessary film, a film that shouldn't have been made. So you have to consider right now The Huntsman Winter's War as one of the duds of April. And then the final week of April. The final weekend of April, which is April 29th. Just last weekend, actually. There are three movies that I'm going to be talking about here. The first one will be the movie Keanu. And this movie is an action comedy film. It stars Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele. These guys have their own Comedy Central show called Key and Peele. I've seen a little bit of it, and it's alright, I haven't seen too much of their comedy, but from what I've seen, it's alright. It's not too bad. So, this is their first feature-length film, I believe, this duo. And this is a direct parody of the 2014 film John Wick. Pretty much the same type of... So this is kind of a parody of John Wick. John Wick, I haven't seen the movie, but the main point of the movie is that Keanu Reeves plays John Wick, a guy who his dog gets killed, and he takes revenge against the people who killed his dog. With Keanu, you switch a dog over with a cat. And so these two have a cat that they love. It gets kidnapped by a gang, and Key and Peele have to go and save the cat, basically. So it is kind of a parody of John Wick. And Keanu Reeves has a cameo in this film as well. So only fitting, considering it ties into John Wick. You know, the movie is a direct parody of John Wick. Plus, the movie's named Keanu, so Keanu Reeves has to be in it. You know, it only makes sense. So Keanu, so far, I don't think this is meant to be a big movie as well. One of those movies, again, that isn't meant to be a big film. Budget is $15 million. The box office has been $9.5 million. So, but it'll continue to make money and all that, and it'll probably go over $15 million most likely. Critically, it has a 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a solid good percentage. So enough critics liked it enough, liked the style of comedy that Key and Peele presented in this film, to really recommend it for sure. The next movie I'm going to talk about is Mother's Day. This is a movie of, you guessed it, Mother's Day. This is directed by Gary Marshall, who also directed Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve. Stories about Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve. So he directed these two movies, and Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve were both romantic comedies. And so they were both romantic comedies, and they both sucked, according to critics. I saw both of the movies, and I didn't mind them. I actually enjoyed Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve. These movies were different stories told of different people experiencing Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve. Now, Mother's Day is about different people experiencing Mother's Day. In fact, the movies are just like, plot points are just like Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve. So these films are just like, so Mother's Day is just like those two films. It stars an all-star cast. Jennifer Aniston, Jason Sudeikis, Julia Roberts, Kate Hudson, and more. So, a big-time cast. And box office-wise, it's made $10.5 million so far off a $25 million budget. So it's early, it's still going to make some more money. But critically, this movie has a 8% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. New Year's Eve and Valentine's Day also had similar ratings where they were critically panned. So, needless to say, this movie, critics hated it. So there you go. And then the final movie I'm going to talk about for April is going to be the video game film Ratchet and Clank. Ratchet and Clank, it is based on a video game. And I don't know too much about it anyway. This movie, this year is supposed to be a big year for video game movies. It could be, because you have Warcraft coming out based on the World of Warcraft video game series. And you have Assassin's Creed coming out as well. So these two movies, if they're successful, they're going to anchor a new video game craze among fans. So if these two movies are successful, then you're going to see an uptick in video game movies that could rival comic book movies as well. So it's very interesting. It's a big year. Ratchet and Clank is the first video game movie that came out this year. And so far, critics did not like the film. So far, video game movies are not off to a great start. Rotten Tomatoes has Ratchet and Clank as an 18% rating. So, not very good. And box office-wise, it's made $5.7 million on a $20 million budget. Still early, so the movie is probably going to break even about, or something like that. Break even or just fall short. You know, something like that anyway. But so far, Ratchet and Clank is not, is not a big success for sure, unfortunately. So, that is it for my movies, for the big films of April that I just pre-overviewed, basically. So that's it for that. Stay tuned. Coming up, end of May, beginning of June, I will have a video on the month of May, which promises to be a big month. So that is it for this video on the movies of April. D-Rock 1992 out.